Welcome to the People Teaching People podcast. Joining me on the podcast is Samantha Woods. Samantha, a self proclaimed brain nerd, has dedicated over 20 years to unraveling the mysteries of neuroscience and its practical impact on learning, brain health, and well being. A former classroom teacher, team leader, and learning support specialist, Samantha quickly discovered that thriving in school and in life is about more than just mastering academics. This realization fueled her passion for reimagining how we support students who don't fit the conventional mold. As the founder of Kaizen Educational Services, Samantha is on a mission to make education more inclusive and impactful in today's fast paced world. Her innovative work through the Brain Hub Academy, a cutting edge executive skills coaching program, empowers educators, students, and parents with engaging tools and strategies to build essential executive functioning skills together. Samantha advocates for an approach where executive skill building isn't limited to those with diagnoses, but becomes a universal toolkit for success. With her unique blend of expertise, humor, and passion, Samantha is here to challenge how we think about learning, inspire transformation, and prove that with the right tools, everyone can thrive. Thank you so much for joining me today, Samantha.
Thank you, Tiana. Thanks for having me.
So, I love this. You've described yourself as a brain nerd. What has sparked your fascination with the brain and how it relates to learning?
Oh, yeah, brain nerd big time. It evolved as people asking the question, like, what do you do and why brains? And are you a psychiatrist? Are you a psychologist? Are you a doctor? And I was like, no, I'm just really, I guess, a brain nerd. So that just came to be how I would identify myself to make that connection of how nerdy I got about researching brains and neuroscience to do better for students.
Now, I'm curious sort of what led to this fascination with the brain and executive
Mm.
functioning skills. So, what is that journey or story that got you to be so interested into diving into how we learn and to the brain?
It really was, I mean, half mistake and half pure passion. I think the passion was probably 80%, which was I was working with students. And this was in the 90s, early 2000s, where I was given those students. I was given, and I call them actually one of my keynotes, the four boys who changed my life and my learning and my own ability to function in this overstimulating world. I was elementary trained and then moved into junior, senior high and was assigned to academic support. So in the counseling student services department, I was assigned a group of boys at that time who, on different occasions, were really struggling. And then the struggle became worse and worse. And the behavior and all of the negativity or black cloud around these boys who were brilliant and are brilliant. And so I was assigned those kids to, get them snapped back into shape and learn and be organized and study and reach their potential. I wish you could see my sarcastic face right now because now I look back and I think, wow, that actually happened. And it was like, how can we fix them and then send them back so that they reach their potential? And I was really stumped because I would get these psychoeducational assessments. They've been assessed and looking at the assessments and report cards. And I'm looking at all this data and I'm thinking, there has to be a reason because these boys, in this case, were and are amazing. Like they have this huge, massive capacity for cognition and what's going on. Something has to be getting in their way, something. And that's where the journey began because the mistake part was I went to a workshop that I thought was another topic, and I ended up landing in a seminar presented by Dr. Peg Dawson, who is, if you're in education, is the guru of executive functioning. And that's where the journey began. It was like, wow, this is interesting because we weren't taught about brains and we weren't taught about neuroscience in my education programs. And then the 80% passion just kicked into, I've got to learn more and figure this out. So I quickly realized it wasn't behavior and it wasn't a lack of ability. It was the way we were teaching. We weren't teaching, it was executive functions that were getting in their way.
So, for people who are listening and might not be familiar with the term, what exactly do you mean by executive functioning skills?
So when I landed in that workshop, I'm like, what is this executive functioning thing? How Dr. Peg Dawson explained it, and many others since then. Executive functions are the management system of the brain. So it's your ability to self regulate, to plan, to organize, to initiate a task, to focus, to really manage. It's the CEO of the brain. We often call it the CEO or the conductor of the brain, found in the prefrontal cortex. So it's the actual piece of your brain that allows you to reach goals and carry out a task. Those skills are developmental in nature, and they are actually the last thing to develop in a human brain. So brains develop from back to front. And of course, and when we show this to students and parents as well, it's like, guess what the last thing is to develop? Like your executive functions. And within the umbrella of executive functions, those skills are developmental. So, impulse control, for example, that's an executive function. Planning and organization, metacognition, the ability to think about or reflect on our own thinking and self awareness. When that was explained to me, I was like, wow, this is incredible because executive functioning, how do you actually write the test or do well in school if you're struggling with those pieces?
Mhm. And I know I got more curious about executive functioning skills in our family's journey with our oldest son. So he got diagnosed with ADHD in grade 7, and as he was going through, as I'm sure you know, like, all the questionnaires and assessments and all the things, I was
Right.
sitting there and reflecting and thinking to myself, "Huh, like, that's me too." And interestingly enough, I went and chatted with my doctor, and sure enough, I also have ADHD, as does my son, and I would we've done some closer looking at our executive functioning skills, and there's similarities and differences in the things that we struggle with or have strengths in, but it was, definitely eye-opening, and I know that I'm not alone when I've sort of shared, "Oh my gosh, in my 40s, I learned this about myself and sort of going through this with my son." There's other moms out there too who are in the same boat, which is so interesting. And so I would love for you to dive into the idea of how executive functioning skills and ADHD go hand in hand, and why would somebody with ADHD have some particular challenges with developing these skills?
Great question because you've linked ADHD and executive functioning skills, which is the hugest piece. And kudos to you for recognizing those pieces because I think a lot of parents in our age bracket are diagnosed through their children. There is a genetic component, not 100%, but there is, and there's many theories around that piece. However, as women and girls, and it's probably important for people to know, is girls often present differently than boys. So the executive functioning piece is the common thread often. The difference is it's often layered with anxiety. So we often say ADHD and anxiety are close buddies. ADHD is an executive functioning condition or lagging skills of executive function. It has nothing to do with intelligence. So the connection between ADHD and executive function, people often say, what do you mean I have ADHD? What's this executive functioning piece? It's the same thing. So ADHD is actually a misnomer, in my opinion. It's been renamed so many things since the 1700s, the most recent in the 80s. So now we call it ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. People often say, well, but my child's not hyperactive. So I don't know about you, Tiana. I don't know if you were considered hyperactive
No,
as a child,
I was not, and neither is our
right?
son, so we learned that it was more the inattentive type.
Exactly. So there's that under the radar type, right?
Yes, you sit
Right
there
there.
and you're looking like you're doing all the things. I remember leaving class and thinking to myself, "I don't think I actually learned anything," but I was able to go home and figure it out. It just took longer, and then recently I learned that my sister had the same experience that I did in school. So, I think that is a misunderstanding people have, as you say, like, it's not that your child or yourself would be necessarily bouncing off the walls and have all this energy.
Exactly. Oftentimes, females, and I mean, I'm talking about stereotypical in the classroom, watching out for those girls who are under the radar or are distracted. So, attention deficit disorder isn't actually a deficit of attention at all. It's misdirected attention. So you
Mhm.
might not be focused on when you were in your classes, you were pleasant, you weren't a behavior problem, and you probably looked like you were paying attention. But internally, there's misdirected attention. You're thinking about all these other things and having a hard time redirecting back, myself included. And so we will work, and often that's where you start to see that anxiety piece and overworking, overorganizing to it's a tool to really compensate for the lack of executive, not the lack of delayed executive functioning development. So in an ADHD brain, what we know is approximately executive functions are delayed up to 30%. So we all have our chronological age, and then we have an executive age. That does level out as our brains develop. But as a child, this is where that anxiety piece can come in because your son, for example, I'm not sure how old he is, maybe 20,
He's
guessing, maybe
18. Yeah,
18.
yeah.
So 18, like these brains are high flying. You're looking at the psychoid going, wow, there's all this cognitive, as Dr. Hollowell says, like these Ferrari brains. Like they are speedy and bright. But guess what? Their executive function is lagging by 30% of their age. So if we take 30% of 18, what's the executive functioning age? Which is, now I'm going to have to do math. What is that, 14? Did I get that correct?
About there,
So
yeah.
executive functioning age is 14, intelligence, growth, all of those pieces is 18. And so for a long time, and it's still a challenge, the connection between ADHD and lagging executive skills is often not connected in the conversation until it becomes a problem.
Mhm. Yeah, agreed. And it's hard to decipher and it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
understand. And you've shared some, but I'm wondering what other sort of misconceptions around ADHD and executive functioning are there out there, especially in an educational setting? So that key one of that student that's being compliant and sitting there and doing all those things and flying under the radar is a big one. Are there other things that people should be aware of?
This is my favorite topic is myth busting ADHD. I was just writing up a module for our Brain Hub and for the educator portal that I was talking to you about before. And I think it's the top 10. I think I actually ended up putting 15 because there's so many myths out there about ADHD. The first one, which I've already mentioned, is that ADHD is actually lagging executive functioning skills. ADHD, it's not a behavioral condition. The symptoms can be very behavioral, right? And that's why boys often get diagnosed really early because typically, not always, like your son was inattentive ADHD, but there's hyperactivity and more obvious behavioral pieces, impulsivity, lack of self regulation, lack of focus. So, all of those people get noticed really quick in a classroom setting. So, as much as we're watching and reporting or referring the hyperactive kiddo, we really need to look at that kiddo who Mm, is maybe not as engaged or super anxious and still getting really good marks. So ADHD doesn't equal bad marks. ADHD doesn't equal lack of intelligence. And so those are some myths where it's like, okay, and I love Dr. Ross Green. He's like my academic crush, him and Dr. Hollowell. He says, and it's become my own mantra, if you can steal someone else's phrase for a mantra, is behavior is simply an indicator of a lagging skill or unsolved problem. So if you're seeing behaviors in a child or an adult, it doesn't matter, it can be anybody. If we can put that behavior on the shelf and really start thinking about what's causing that. What's the lagging skill or unsolved problem? So, ADHD isn't a behavior management approach. That's another myth. Well, we can manage behavior, but it won't work. We need to manage this lagging skills piece and support that. And the behavior really improves.
Now, obviously, these executive skills are important for all of us. So,
Hmm.
something to think about whether or not you or someone in your life has ADHD. So, if parents and teachers are looking at ways to support the development of executive functioning skills, what might be like some everyday practical tools or approaches people could use?
It's really doing a deep dive into what tools and strategies can support executive functioning. So when we think of time management, what can we do to model that and teach it? Impulse control. How can we model that? How can we provide opportunities? And I'm talking about one of the really great recommendations, which people say that's so simple. I'm like, yeah, but we as a society don't have time to do these things, right? But it's how do we provide our children with authentic opportunities to practice and develop executive functioning? Impulse control is a huge one. The most obvious is phones, technology. How do we model that for our students to practice impulse control? And a strategy to talk about brains and not behavior. So, as a family, as a classroom, as a community, how are we going to practice impulse control and actually teaching kids what are the names of these executive functions so that they can start to develop the self awareness naturally and integrate that into their lives? And it's not behavioral, them making a choice because they're going to get in trouble so much as, hey, like one of the great strategies is talking about brains, not behavior, and saying things like, I'm noticing you're having a really hard time focusing on writing this essay. And your brain's playing tricks on you because it wants that dopamine hit from your phone right now. What can we do? Like, I'm going to put my phone away. Our agreement in our families when we're doing focus work and activities, the phones are away, or whatever it is that's pulling our attention, right? And parents, we need to do that, and educators, so that we're all in it together.
Mhm.
There's so many I could list up. I mean, I've got toolkits, I've got strategies. The key for any executive function, diagnosis or not, it doesn't have to be an ADHD piece, is scaffolding. How do we provide the scaffolding for developing brains to learn these skills? It's not a should, oh, by the age of 18, you should be able to organize a binder. Instead, how do I show you that? Back to the 4 boys. Um, Sitting and showing them, how do you study? How do you organize your time? How do you think about this problem? How do you break it down? And actually showing them, okay, studying, are you sitting for 3 hours at a time? That's not actually rooted in research anymore. Let's work together and chunk it. Let's chunk and break down And those types of approaches are stress relieving for everybody, and that student can really feel successful.
And what I love about all those is really they're good for all students and for all
Totally.
of us. And how our children organize their binders are thanks to you and a class that they took
No.
when they started junior high. And our older two took a study skills class from your organization as well, which was amazing. That is a part of it, right? How do you take all that information and break it
Mhm.
down in a way that's going to make sense and that you can build kind of one step and then the next, and then also having those organizational strategies. And I was kind of giggling earlier on in our conversation when you were saying, like all the organizational tools that you implement to have success. Yes, as I look around, I see like my sticky notes,
Yeah.
my agenda, my calendar, and my phone, and then there's also my family calendar upstairs. It's a lot, but yeah,
But
those
yeah.
tools and things really work. And I think, as you said, over time we develop those skills. And when I was discussing with my doctor, she's like, "You've probably developed a lot of strategies to manage things and to be able to function and be successful in the world." And yeah, it's exactly that. You find your tools and strategies that help you to keep organized, keep on top of things, and sort of manage some of those challenges that we have. But I love how you're saying like all these things are good for all of us.
Y For all of us, and I so like, the whole diagnosis piece, like, you don't have to be diagnosed to have these tools, right? Like, let's even take that out of, I mean, the equation, and we're all developing our own toolkits, like this smorgasbord of tools. It's not every tool, and you've obviously done a fantastic job over your years of, and you didn't even know, right? You're like, I need to do it this way so that I won't forget this and I won't forget this. And it's not until you start watching other people and you're like, "Oh, you don't need that?" Right?
You
Or
don't
you
need
don't need
5
that?
lists.
What? Like, you don't need
Yeah.
colors and, like, you don't need to bump into things. That's a big one is, like,
Mm.
bumping into something and not just having it on your phone or your calendar, like, out of sight, out of mind. It's like, "Oh, there's a lot of out of sight now." Right? When we were growing up, it had to be in sight because we didn't have the technology to do the calendars and the planning so these kiddos, doesn't matter if they have ADHD or not, they're inundated with information way more than we had, and now it's out of sight to manage it.
Mhm.
So you bring up such a great point of developing your own toolkit, whether you have ADHD or not. We're learning in the workplace when I'm doing corporate presentations and whatnot. It's a piece, especially as many of us starting to work more remotely. Back to the original is how do you self-manage? How do you manage your time at home? Because our brains have not caught up to what's happening now. So how do you work with your primal brain in a modern world?
Yeah, fast and furious changes out there, and as you said, information overload. And you had touched on the anxiety piece, and there
Mm.
is that connection of executive functioning impacting not just learning, but emotional regulation and mental
Mhm.
health. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that connection a little bit more and some challenges people might face, and how maybe developing executive functioning skills can really help manage some of those connected emotional mental health pieces.
That anxiety piece can really, really trick that brain. In our Brain Hub Academy program, we call the anxiety center, or it's the amygdala. So the amygdala is the switching station to decide if something is a threat or not. So the CEO of the brain, as I was explaining earlier, is in the office at the desk, making sure all the pieces are working. Our little security guard at the front door decides if something is a threat. And in this day and age, there's a lot of threats for all of us, but especially developing brains who are just think if you are lagging in impulse control and you got to keep checking that phone and that social media, that's triggering that Amy G to say, whoa, not, we call it company brain. I'm not letting you through the door of company brain because you are a threat to my CEO. So she's telling the CEO to hide under the desk. So what happens is the horrible design in modern day, this protected us in, you know, prehistoric times. Once that center is triggered enough, it shuts down the thinking brain, the self management. So that connection, ADHD, executive functioning, emotional regulation, is like we call it the horrible love triangle, but also like amazing too. So that EMG security guard shuts down the thinking brain. So that pattern is repeated and repeated. So kiddos today, not just phones, but let's say, I mean, today's threat could be a math test or an English essay, whatever, a presentation for an adult, whatever that programming has been stored in the hippocampus, in the library of your brain. And so anxiety shuts down the actual skills you need to function. I mean, that served us great when there was a true threat of someone trying to, take our families and our food when we lived in prehistoric times, because we could fight, flight, or freeze. Not so much now. So Amy G is great. She protects us from threats, but she can also trick the brain. And so that's that strong connection with ADHD or any, especially ADHD, but for all students now, I believe, overload of stimulus and threat, and their thinking brains aren't thinking because they're hiding under the desk.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
tough go for kids, adults
Mhm.
and kids. But yeah, I know looking at our three children and sort of the world they're growing up in, it's so much different than my experience. And I know things are going to continue to change. So if looking ahead, like what are your thoughts on the future of education and how moving forward, do we really think about building these executive functioning skills in students and how maybe do we need to shift the landscape of learning for the better?
Yeah, this really is my research-based soapbox. We have to do things differently. If we are going to evolve as human beings, we have to change our systems. It's not teachers' fault, it's not principals' fault. It's the system that is not serving our modern world. So the landscape has to change, and there are amazing schools really trying to evolve in that way, despite government mandates of covering, like, it's not about covering more curriculum. And kids don't need more information, and certainly teachers don't need to deliver more information. We've evolved from the one room schoolhouse, and we've evolved from the production industrial revolution model of education. We have to do things differently. We have to start teaching skills and not strictly content. So we have to give student, you talk to anyone in the workforce now, or I was talking to a spine surgeon actually working with his residents who are brilliant. However, he said to me, I'm shocked at their lack of skills to problem solve or to initiate or to plan and organize. And the anxiety levels are so high. It's not their fault, right? It's like anything. If you're not taught it, how can you do it? So the system is really, I personally think, for many students who are, as we call, neurodiverse or sensitive, anxious, it isn't serving them. It's actually somewhat damaging because they're not fitting into this production line. And I think I was saying earlier, we know better, so we have to do better changing to keep up.
Mhm. Well, and I wanna give a little shout out. So our youngest kiddo is in junior high, and he goes to STEM Innovation Academy, and they do really apply the design thinking model there, and
Yes.
it's really been eye-opening and interesting to see the different approach to teaching and learning that he's experienced, and a real emphasis on the doing and the process and the making mistakes and learning from them, and more formative assessment along that journey versus it being all about what you produce at the end. and it's been interesting. So I'm excited to kind of see what happens
I've
more there
heard
for him too.
amazing coincidentally, I was talking to someone, yesterday about STEM Learning Academy,
Mhm.
and exactly, I was like, "This is amazing." Like, this process is I mean, back in the day, we used to call it backwards design or critical thinking or right? And really needing skills. Like that natural opportunity to develop executive functioning skills is a beautiful thing
Mhm.
alongside what is this thing you're developing because they don't even know they're doing it, right? It's like
Exactly.
what's the name of that? That's amazing. That's an
Yeah.
amazing growth. I'm just so hopeful that there will be I mean, we've had schools sign on this last a shout out to Connect Charter who signed on, same thing. They're like these innovators and game changers who know, okay, something's got to shift here in our systems to support healthy brain development.
And the type of learners that we really need to have in the workforce, even in the future, right? We need people to be innovative and creative and thinkers and problem solvers. And it's all good stuff, all good, exciting
Flexible
stuff.
thinkers, right?
Flexible
Like
thinkers.
to
Yes.
move and shift because they're preparing like people will say we have to prepare them. I'm like, prepare them for what? And I get it. We have to prepare our students, but we have to make them I stole this term. Apparently I'm stealing terms today, but from Greg Hart, future fit. We need future
Mm,
fitness, right?
I
We
love
don't
that.
need because kids, man, they'll learn the content, right? We have resources and technology to learn content. Skills, so
Hmm.
yeah, how that future fitness, like a STEM or a Connect or Brent would call like how are you providing these amazing opportunities for this development?
Yeah, exciting things happening. So it'll be neat to see how things move and transition moving forward. Now, I wanted to ask you more about this Brain Hub Academy that you've developed, an online coaching platform. So, what is it all about? Who's it for? What can people expect to find there?
The Brain Hub Academy actually came out of so we've been in person coaching students and families and adults for, oh gosh, 13 years now. And a few years ago, actually probably during COVID, I thought, how are we going to bring this into classrooms or how do we bring this into homes so people can do their own work, right? Like not everybody can send their child or their student to Kaizen or to any, not just us, any coaching platform to build these skills. So that was the kind of motivation for the Brain Hub Academy. It was like, what if we created this hub for actually originally intended for parents? And then I had a bunch of educators reach out and said, can we have that? So we pivoted to have good flexible thinking. It really tested me, had to pivot and pivot to develop an it's actually like a hybrid now where we have developed all of the tools, the strategies, the research, like the past 13 years of in-person coaching and packaged it and organized it into an educator professional development platform along with a student platform. So educators and students can actually work alongside each other in these areas. So there's 6 modules. We took our top 6 asks from educators. We interviewed educators and parents and of course students, and we developed 6 key modules along with a cognitive assessment. Our assessment provider is our partner. It's called the Brain Blueprint for Kaizen, and our assessment provider, amazing. So we do an online cognitive assessment and 45 minutes. And it's no diagnosis, no coding. It's just strict brain data to be like, hey, how does your brain work, Tiana? What are your strengths? And what are some lagging things here? Because we all have them and we normalize brains. It's not about, oh, you have ADHD or you have the, it's like, okay, well, you have crazy amazing visual memory and I have really struggling with attention. So how do we actually open these conversations in classrooms to normalize it for all kids and same for teachers? Because the burnout rate we were talking about earlier is crazy. and they need support and help because they're just so dedicated. And so we've developed everything to give to them so they can literally do this in their classrooms.
Mhm.
Yes, it started out as a support. We have Brain Hub at home for parents. Some parents want to do this work at home, or they might have a mentor for their child. It's a very collaborative space for educators and parents to gather and do this essential work to empower kids with confidence to know it's their brain. This is how their brain works.
It's pretty fundamental, isn't it, to learning?
Yeah.
Getting to know yourself, getting to know your brain, getting to know how you learn best, getting to know some new strategies and things that you can do to help yourself in some of the areas that might be a little bit more challenging. So it sounds like an amazing resource and online community for people to make some really good things happen for the teaching and learning community. It's exciting. Congratulations. I'm sure you
Well,
put
I
a lot
wanted to
into
go. I
it.
was like, I didn't have these. I was just writing I was like 24-year-old new teacher, sprite and gonna change the world. And I didn't have those tools or strategies. And who has time to do that? I mean, I hit burnout because you're developing this stuff on the fly to really help these kiddos. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to package it and then it's to be integrated. It's not one more thing for a teacher to do. It actually makes their job easier. When I started teaching executive functioning skills and integrating to that level, like I said, the behavior changed. We had more time in a classroom. We had more time to actually build skills and talk and collaborate and innovate versus cover curriculum. And, it's we joke about it. Like I said to the spine surgeon that I met last week, I said facetiously, I said, "So I guess you were taught about spines and backs in med school, huh?" He was like, looked at me like, "Yes." I said, "Yeah, because we were just talking about school systems." I said, "I think it's fascinating that I know they do a little bit of it now, but we weren't actually taught about brains. We weren't taught about brains, and yet we work with them all the time."
I am curious. You've mentioned some people that you really admire in terms of the work that they do, but do you have a favorite teacher or somebody that really has impacted you along your teaching and learning journey?
I have a teacher that actually was a principal of mine when I went into education, Marianne Johnston. And Marianne Johnston to me was the reason for me to continue in teaching because she was the ultimate role model of learning and growth. She never stopped learning and growing herself. And if we needed or wanted a PD experience, and there was never a problem because she was all about empowering new teachers to learn and grow. And she was the ultimate mentor. And when I watched her with children, incredible. And so she, for me, as more of a mentor and teacher, taught me how to be better and better and never satisfied. She always, and I mean that as a compliment, she always set the bar higher and higher for us to reach. So, those achievable challenges, we were never told, okay, now you get it. Now you're good. It was just always a little bit more, a little bit more. And so I'm very grateful to her authenticity and her Ferrari brain, really, and her lack of tolerance for the status quo
She sounds amazing.
is amazing. She is amazing. And really, those first years of teaching, as I think any first 5 years, I would say, are just, as you know, it's all challenging, but those first years, you're thinking, wow. And she just had a sixth sense of knowing and encouraging and supportive and really looked at our team and the individuality of our team to really pick out our strengths and grow those. We weren't all treated the same.
I love that. Very personalized.
Very.
Now, I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom that might inspire, empower, and support people with their own teaching and learning journeys.
I applaud anybody who is working with brains, developing brains, children especially. I think the encouragement and hope, or not even encouragement, the hope for our future is to keep going. I watched the Churchill documentary on the weekend, the new one, and one of Churchill's phrases that I've got on my computer now is, "If you're going through hell, keep going." And there's such beauty in that statement because I think our kids are always watching. And so kids have to learn and see us going through really hard times to build their own resilience and confidence to know it's going to be okay. A lot of kids I feel today and young adults are watching with fear because they're not sure they're going to come out the other side. And I think when I applaud people who show up to work with children every day, and that includes parents, and who are vulnerable, who are doing the best they can, who are not perfect, and that they're allowing their children to see that and that it's okay to struggle and it's okay to fail and it's okay to pivot 800 times and it's okay to change your mind. We can teach these skills explicitly. We can sign up for programs and we can do all of these things. But at the end of the day, our kids are watching. And so perhaps that's the most powerful piece I see is, you know, walking our talk and going head into the storm and developing the skills to come out the other side and do it better even the next time.
Thank you so very much, Samantha. I appreciate you taking the time today to chat with me and share your words of wisdom and your expertise and your story. So, if people are curious to find more about you and all the things that you're up to, where are the best places to find you?
You know what? Our website is the number one place, kaizeneduc.com. Kaizen Education Services is where we are. If you hang out on that website, you can also there's signups there for free tools and strategies for educators. Then we have an educator page where they can sign up for it's actually my teaching transformation that happened to me when I saw Dr. Judy Willis and Dr. Ross Green and Dr. Peg Dawson and developed my first toolkit. So they can get that for free. And if they want to check out Platform Calgary, that is a wonderful space of tech innovation. And if you want to know what's going on in the city of Calgary and Alberta, Alberta Innovates Platform Calgary. If you've got that's where you'll also find me trying to learn more about this tech industry. That's wonderful, but wow, the learning curve's steep.
Always learning. I love that.
Always learning.
I love that. Thank you so very much for joining me today. It was great to connect with you and to learn from you.
Thank you so much for having me and keep doing what you're doing. Keep shining that light. There's hope.